Thank you, and thank you for having me. And also a big thank you for everyone that's attending today. I'm excited to take you through one of my personally favorite topics, total talent management. But before we dive into what is total talent management, I want to give you just a brief introduction of who VectorVMS is. So looking at who is VectorVMS, and that's where transitioning over these slides. We'll take a look at who is VectorVMS. So we're a market leader in the contingent workforce space. Some of you actually might know us as PeopleFluent. We are a former division of PeopleFluent that was rebranded in 2018 to specialize in the contingent workforce. We streamlined the process of finding and managing the contingent workforce by automating the sourcing and management of your non-employee labor. We've definitely seen a rise in the total number of total talent management implementations and are here to share with you things we have seen that have made those implementations be successful. For the purposes of today, the agenda, we're going to talk about what is total talent and why is it so important, and then we'll jump into those 4 keys of incorporating total talent into your workforce. So looking at stakeholders, defining your current state, using that to make your desired state, and then tying it all together. So kicking it off, what is total talent management? So we hear this word thrown around all the time, but what does it actually mean to you and your organization? So when we're thinking about the presentation today, we're going to think about total talent management as the organization and management of personnel across the organization, regardless of their employee type. A lot of the time when people hear total talent management, they immediately start thinking in terms of acquisition. How am I going to source talent across my organization effectively? So that's just one component of total talent acquisition, and you'll see it on the left side here. And it means different things based off of where your organization is. So with that in mind, if you're new to contingent workforce management, that means for you, it might be looking at process to set up who is going to do that sourcing for me, building a network of qualified staffing suppliers, or it could be things like aligning yourself with specific technologies like a vendor management system. If you already have established contingent workforce programs, that might be looking at how am I going to combine these talent types. Do I need to look at agencies that work across both full-time and contingent, or how do I push difficult recs across those systems that I'm having trouble sourcing? As I mentioned, sourcing is an important component, but when we look to that right-hand side of the screen, you'll see there's a lot that comes on the other side of the house, the management component of total talent management. And we'll talk more about these items listed here on the right when we look at our last step, bringing it all together. But first, we're going to talk about what's driving this increase in total talent management adoption. So as was mentioned, we have a couple different polling questions today to kind of understand what does total talent mean for you? How do you feel about it? And starting with our first question, what is your timeline for implementing a total talent management strategy? Is this something you're looking at in the next 3 months, 6 months, a year, year and a half? Not sure, I'm here to learn and determine what that strategy is, or I already have a great total talent management program running smoothly today. So we'll give you some time to go in and start completing this first polling question with us. And that's pretty much what I expected. I'm not surprised to see that a lot of people are here to learn. The term total talent management over the last couple of years has been so ambiguous. So hopefully after this presentation, you're able to kind of learn more and define what that strategy is. Moving on to the next question here. So what is total talent? And why is it so important? And why now? The first thing to consider is the rise of the use of different types of labor to begin with. So 91% of organizations, according to Forbes, are already using some form of outside labor. This has been done a couple different ways, and it's also made us think about different forms of labor differently, for lack of better words. So instead of being a small segment of your workforce where you occasionally use that staffing supplier down the road, it's become a key part of our management strategy. And that's why it's being taken more seriously and considering a total talent management project. In addition to people using outside labor, they're using more outside labor. So according to Gartner, 32% of organizations plan to transition at least a portion of their workforce from full-time to contingent. And this statistic came out actually before the pandemic, and I think it's been fueled further by the pandemic. So at the beginning, I think it was more about generational shifts, the push to flexible work and how people want to work. And now I think it's fueled more by uncertainty, maybe wanted to bring people more on in a contingent perspective before going back to making that full-time commitment. So if you're thinking about implementing a total talent management strategy, you're not alone. 69% of organizations are looking to increase their use of total talent management for controlling costs. So from our side of the house, cost and visibility are the two main reasons organizations are looking for total talent management strategies and starting to actually put them in place. In addition to cost and visibility, 40% of employers are looking to total talent management to kind of expand their sourcing pool and bring in that top tier talent in a more efficient manner. I mean, we all feel it right now. It's a tight labor market, and trying to get top talent is very difficult. It's a major struggle when there's more positions that are open than there are candidates available. And that's what's pushing us to get creative, and total talent management can be that creative spark for you. So with all this momentum and all these reasons of why and the shifts and to going into a total talent management strategy, why isn't that more adopted or more programs in place today? So there are a variety of different impediments or barriers to getting programs started. So working across departments is key and is a key success metric for a total talent workforce strategy. And it's also one of the main reasons why total talent management is not as far as we might think it should be. According to 75% of people, this is the biggest barrier to them of working across departments to get the job done. In addition to siloed organizations, getting buy-in from stakeholders can also be very difficult. And hopefully, as we go through this presentation, you'll kind of be able to build that business case of why this is important when you're juggling 5, 10, 20 different projects. Another huge barrier that we and 46% of organizations face is the lack of data to even get this project started. I know a lot of the time, if you look at projects and you're like, this is a quick win, this is a quick win. This one I really need to think about because I don't have that data to get here. It can be a deterrent from starting that project and getting total talent management in place, when really it should be a motivator and a spark to say, I really want to see everything across my workforce. Let's jump in and define that current state, which we'll do here in a minute. Also, 39% of organizations do not have a strong enough business case to get started. And as we mentioned, we'll talk about that as well. The last reason we hear is just the fear of co-employment. I think this fear has been around for a long time. It's this lingering idea that managing your workforces together is automatically a red flag, co-employment risk. And what I think people fail to realize is the actual likelihood of that co-employment is very low. If you're not the employer of record, if you have strong staffing partners, especially on the contingent side, and you have a clearly written benefit statement, you're going to be able to protect yourself when working across your different workforce types. And if you're uncertain, go to your staffing suppliers, especially the ones that you have a strong partnership with. They're going to be able there to ease your fears, kind of help you set the guidelines of your total talent management strategy as well. So with that in mind, let's look at the steps that are going to help us get to that total talent management. The first is identifying and involving key stakeholders. You're then going to outline your current state, create a clear vision of the future, as well as we're going to bring it all together and really look at that management component that's often missing in programs. So let's jump into the first step, identifying and involving key stakeholders. So when we're looking at this journey, we want to assemble our quote unquote dream team here. So these are the people that are going to be necessary for the success of your program. The tip here, the worst thing you can do from experience is not involve all these different resources early, making sure you're getting their buy-in before we get started, because all too often I see a project get down the road and we didn't involve the right people, so now we're having to kind of go back to square one. So getting started with this, first and foremost, you want to include the heads of each labor category. For the majority of the programs that we've worked with, this means incorporating HR for your full-time and procurement for your contingent workforce. So you're going to need a strong alliance between those two groups, as well as a clear leader. And according to Deloitte, when you're looking at a total talent management strategy, that leader should be your human resource representative. So next, let's find our executive sponsors. So who's going to have the power to push communication, drive change management, and ultimately drive adoption of this new program throughout your organization. And ultimately, you want people that are well respected within your organization, that people are going to look to be that change agent. When in doubt, don't forget to check with legal. When combining systems, adding vendors, swapping technologies, you want to make sure that legal is aware of all these little different things that you're doing. When you're going about these changes, so you make sure all your bases are covered. In addition, it's a great thing to just have IT in the loop. They can manage change of integrations, change of systems. So have them in your back pocket when you're looking at a total talent management strategy. Recruiters. I would say one of the worst things you could do is kind of spring things on your recruiters, whether that's your full-time recruiters, your contingent recruiters. These are the people that are responsible for bringing that top talent to your organization. So make sure they're aware of any of the changes that you might be making that are going to impact them directly. On the same note, your program managers, whether you're managing both programs, one program in-house, or you're using RPO, managed service providers on the contingent side, make sure that just like the recruiters, these people that are managing your top talent are kept aware. Also an honorary mention here is your finance team. I've seen many times implementations get down the path. People are like, that's all right. Finance is on board, and it gets down to it and they are not. And then we had to go back and look at, okay, how are the financials working with both sides? Can they be combined? So just kind of keeping those resources in mind as you're building out your program. And I know this sounds like a lot of people and you're like, I can't pull all these people. This is a lot of time to dedicate. But just like any other project, these resources are going to come in and out. They'll be here for stints of time and they'll let you know when they're needed. But bringing them in early lets them denote to you where they want to be involved, how they want to be involved. And this can be run through, again, your leads here with your human resources and procurement. So we all have a starting spot, right? We just might have to do a little bit of digging to determine where that is. So here are some questions when you're trying to outline your current state that you might ask yourself to get a solid baseline of where your program is standing today. So let's start with the basics. Who owns each group of labor? As mentioned above, we typically see HR owning, full-time, and then procurement owning contingent, but that's not always the case. We've seen cases where HR owns everything. Don't see a lot of cases where procurement owns everything, but I guess it's possible. And then we've also seen a traditional split, but where HR kind of owns more of the hourly salary workers and procurement owns more milestone project-based work. So regardless of where your talent is managed, it's good to know kind of where that talent is coming from, and also just pinpointing, okay, we have talent coming into this department, that department. You don't need to know necessarily at the beginning how much. If you do, that's a bonus. But it kind of tells you where your talent's coming and where you need to define your processes later on. So once we understand who owns each program, it's important to understand who manages each program. And you might be asking me, Taylor, is that not the exact same thing? And what I would say is it really depends on the level of outsourcing you have within a program. So everything could be run completely in-house with all your labor being managed in-house by different departments, or your HR could be run through procurement recruitment outsourcing, your contingent labor run through a managed service provider. We even have a unique service at Vector where we have our clients manage their program and they delegate the individual tasks they don't want us to or want to manage on their own to our shared managed services team. So however you manage or don't, make sure to document that to help us define your current state and for you to drive change in the future. So now we know who our managers are. Fingers crossed, we kind of have some technology in place to help these people out. We just discovered nothing else is kind of find out where is our sourcing happening today. The majority of programs that we talk to already have an applicant tracking system in place to manage their full-time labor. And then many are implementing the vendor management systems to manage their contingent labor. Other systems you're going to want to look at are your HRIS, and more specifically, do you have both workforces in there, or are you just managing your full-time in your HRIS, as well as accounts payable, going back to that finance statement? Where are your vendors being paid? Where are your full-time people being paid? And is that the same system? There are a bunch of periphery systems that we'll consider a little later on, but start thinking about things like alternative sourcing. Do you have any type of learning in place across the different groups? Performance management, are you tracking performance across the teams, and more? So again, we'll go into those types of systems a little later. One thing to ask yourself when you're gathering this information is, okay, here is what I have. What challenges am I trying to solve for? What inefficiencies do I have that I'm noticing as I'm collecting this information? So for a lot of organizations, it's the need to make sure that cost is maximized across different programs, that I can actually have visibility and see across these different programs, and also ensuring that compliance is intact regardless of the worker type. So that's a big one. Whether you're a contingent nurse or a full-time nurse, you want to make sure that worker is going to show up on time, that they're getting the job done, and that they are fully credentialed across your organization. So that's not dependent on the type of worker. You want all workers to have those things, but where can you see that? So that brings us to our next poll. Where are you seeing that today? So what technologies do you have in place today to manage your contingent labor? So kind of gathering one of those questions for you here today on the webcast. Are you using a full-time system for recruitment, but contingent is manual? Do you have a contingent system in place, but your full-time is manual? You have no technology in place as of now for your full-time or contingent, or you have a system in place for both full-time and contingent labor management. So we'll give us a couple seconds here to get that poll going. Yeah, that's pretty much what I expected, that with the rise in the contingent workforce, having a vendor management system or freelance management system in place today, as well as having the full-time in place, but having the contingent manual, those are definitely the two that I expected to see the most. So that's good to know. So I'll give it a couple more seconds. I think it has a couple more people pulling in. It seems to be shifting a little bit. We'll lock that poll in here in a second. All right, I think that's pretty stable. We want to go on to the next slide here. So now that we have a good grasp on our current state, or we will when we kind of ask ourselves those questions, let's move on to step 3. This is the fun part to me. It's really designing what the future of your program is going to look like. It's kind of, to me, it's like building a house. So we need to take it in phases. We can't do everything all at once. And that's where we get overwhelmed. And a lot of the times this project kind of dies off. So when we're looking at the future state of our project, one place that I see things kind of start to fall apart is we skip past phase 1 and just identify the basic missing components. So I've seen a lot of people start looking at like the shiny things that they want to implement and they want to jump right to them. But the first thing we're going to do is really look at, what do you not currently have in place today that you would like from a basic perspective? So you're going to want to know things like your recruiting systems. You may, based off of the information, you may feel like you have what you need in place today. But for those of you, I think there's a small majority in here that did not have a system in place for one or the other. It's looking at, do you plan to grow that full-time segment, or you plan to grow that contingent workforce segment? And is what you have scalable today? If you, same thing on the management side. So we just talked about tech. If you are managing everything in-house today, is that scalable with the headcount you have? And it's looking at, do I need to increase headcount, or do I need to go ahead and start outsourcing certain parts, if not all of my management of my full-time recruiting or my contingent labor management? And if that's the case, we can start an RFP. You can start looking at proposals for RPOs or MSPs to bring on board. So the next step is integration. And I know this can be a scary word, but it doesn't have to be. So do you want to integrate your full-time and contingent recruiting systems together? That's one option, completely up to you. I also see many find benefit in keeping them separate, but then integrating that information into their HRIS, not their IRS, so that they have all that data in a single source of record without having to combine the two individual systems. We can also determine if you want to integrate your program management teams. So if you are using your RPO, for example, on the full-time side, but are managing it in-house, maybe looking to your RPO or looking at different MSP providers that can manage both sets of labor. Again, they both have their advantages and disadvantages. So it's really up to you as a program what strategically makes sense for you. There are many other areas we can look at integrating, but another one I want to talk about for the sake of time are your vendors. Maybe you work with a full-time recruitment agency, or maybe you don't, but you're definitely going to be working with your staffing agencies on the contingent side. So it's looking at, can you drive efficiency by having a recruiter that works across your full-time and your contingent placements? So that's just a couple of areas where you can think about integrating your teams and your technology to be more successful across both workforces. The next phase is a bit more strategic. It's kind of taking a look at your key sourcing strategies. So as I mentioned earlier, and I'm sure you're all feeling it, finding top talent is hard. So if you guys are like many other professionals out there, you're having to get creative. And then I think in this phase is where you can really drive that creativity across your entire workforce. I mean, we've all heard the term, the big resignation floating around. So this is where you can decide, am I set up for that? Do I have my sourcing strategies in place to continue to fill those positions that I need? When we talk about this in your ideal program, in this phase, you can think about things like employee referral programs. And I know those are typically done on the contingent side, but we've seen a lot of technology on the rise, especially on the contingent side, about having your contractors refer other contractors. It's a network of talent. They all talk. So if you're struggling on the contingent side or want to use your contingent base to fill full-time positions, this is one way to do it. Talent pulling and talent network creation. So this is something we've seen growing in the industry of creating talent to use at a later time, or creating talent networks through your website so that you're aware of talent or people looking for specific positions. Direct sourcing has definitely gained traction on the contingent side in our space. So using your employer brand to bring on contingent workers through your website or your job boards. We're all on our phones. Some of you might be on your phone right now, but it's using that component of your employer brand to get things posted online for your workers to be met where they want to be met when looking for your job search. I use the example of like, if I'm going to go look for a job, I'm going to pop over into LinkedIn. I might not reach directly out to my staffing supplier down the street. And then creating a strong social media presence. As we go more digital, as we're reaching out to younger generations, as I mentioned, everyone is kind of on their phones. So doing targeted campaigns, PPC ads, just getting kind of those positions in front of the people that you're looking for. So as with any program, looking at phase 4, it's not going to stay the same forever. And if it does, it typically means we're not growing. If the pandemic has taught us anything, it's the need to be flexible, it's the need to be nimble and adjust on the fly. So we're going to start this process. We're going to do everybody's favorite thing, documentation. But we're also going to keep a consistent analysis of our program and tweak that documentation and those processes as we go. So some of the ways that you can analyze your program is maybe you're doing a vendor RFP. You're looking every so often to make sure that you're getting the top talent, and that's coming from the top players in your location and your geography, or if nationally, that as well. Rate alignment. Rates go up and down. I mean, we've seen it with this pandemic. It's changed rates. It's changed how we pay people. So making sure that you're aligned with your market and your location, or if you're work with the national average, to make sure that you're not underpaying or overpaying for talent. Adjusting job descriptions as you go. So we all kind of set those job descriptions, this is what it is, and we keep moving forward with it, but we need to continually look at the market and adjust our job descriptions within our programs to make sure that we're keeping up with the changing market. System optimizations. From more of a technical perspective, looking at your applicant tracking system, your vendor management system, any type of talent pool technology, and making sure you're staying on top of those latest updates. You might get 5, 10, however many emails that go to your spam about this release or that release. So checking in every so often, we recommend it yearly to make sure you have all the latest and greatest features turned on that you might not know exist. And the last is, and you guys are already doing this, staying on top of the industry. So looking at things like HCI with their learnings, their conferences, their webinars. So you're staying on top of the market and staying competitive against the different organizations you're competing for talent for. As I mentioned above or throughout this presentation, total talent management is more than just sourcing. So it's time to take a look at kind of different initiatives that are going to bring it all together and add that management component of total talent management. So there's an endless number of ways you can manage across your groups, but for today, I wanted to highlight these 6 because this is what I'm seeing work for a total talent management strategy across our clients and partners today. And with this, I'm going to start with learning. Selfishly, vendor management, our VectorVMS is part of learning technologies group. And so we've seen an increase in the need for learning. So whether you're a contingent worker, you're a full-time worker, your top workers are going to be thirsty for knowledge, as all great employees are. So with this in mind, it's important to keep that strategy in place. So a lot of us kind of have like a basic, if not excellent learning program in place today for a full-time, but it's kind of determining what you want that learning structure to look like for your contingent workers to position yourself as an employer of choice. So when you incorporate learning into your contingent workforce, it's really showing that you're making the investment into that worker and making them feel valued. Some people feel comfortable with incorporating their contingent workers into their learning management systems, and some don't, and that's completely fine. But when you're doing those vendor RFPs, this can mean looking for different vendors that are using learning as a benefit and offering learning to the workers that they have out there as their employer of record. So something to think about when looking at your staffing suppliers, is this a benefit that they offer? The next is performance. And performance, while measured differently, is an important part across your workforce strategy. So for the full-time side, I'm sure you guys have performance management systems in place, looking at their career objectives and measuring their performance against it. Where on the contingent side, it's more of gathering that information through your vendor management system of how well did they do on the assignment? Did they show up? Did they get the job done? And more importantly, would you hire them back again? So this is, if you're not doing this in your vendor management system today for the contingent side, I think it's important for your full workforce strategy because it lets you determine when you have that full-time role that is just very difficult to fill, let me go to my contingent base and look at that data on their performance. And is there somebody I want to extend an interview to, as well as the full-time side, tracking performance. And if that person retires, or maybe that person goes to find another opportunity, but is willing to come back on a contingent basis, you can add them to what we call our alumni resource pools. This also fuels your talent pools in general. So talent pooling is something we're seeing a lot of now because of the need to fill positions quickly. And I can't stress this enough, the best programs that we've seen are those that plan ahead. And talent pooling is a great tool for planning ahead for your workforce. So for those that might be unfamiliar with the term, it's creating a network of talent that can be used at a later date. As I mentioned, this could be an alumni resource pool, so bringing those returners back into a pool to be alerted when there's contingent or full-time work available. An option for silver medalist candidates. So maybe you get down the line, you have 2 candidates who are really great, and you pick one over the other. Sending that second candidate to your talent pool will allow another manager, or maybe you have another position coming up shortly, for them to be notified that this is a position that's coming available. Adding options on your career site for future positions. We've seen this especially with organizations that have like high volume, light industrial, retail, creating a network or creating a site to join your talent network to immediately alert workers that are interested and have physically expressed interest because they went and signed up for this talent pool is a great way to kind of manage across both so you can fill your full-time and contingent positions. And something that we've seen kind of to keep your employees engaged during the pandemic is if you have or know you're going to have any type of furlough, kind of keeping them in that system, keeping a touch point with them, making sure they know opportunities are coming available, especially if they're a quality employee. It just was bad timing. So if you choose a technology to manage this, the one thing I would say is I would recommend it having an artificial component that does the matching to the job descriptions for you. This just saves you time, but it does not replace that human component because I've seen that happen way too often as well. You want to make sure if you're using a talent pool, you designate a resource and document kind of who's going to do the curation of the talent so that when it comes to pushing something to your full-time or pushing somebody to your contingent workforce, you've had touch points and they've been engaged and they've been curated to take those positions. Assessments are something new that we're seeing in this space, but I definitely think as they're adopted and as they're implemented, people are going to see the value and assessments are going to grow in the next couple of years. And I'm not talking about pen and paper necessarily. I'm talking more about organizations that have created this niche space for full-time and contingent to test the candidate's knowledge before they get on site. So this isn't like reading an arithmetic. It's more like, I want a Java developer. Here's my systems pre-built into this assessment technology to have them work with the technology I use today to make sure they say they can do what they said they could do on the resume. And that's going to help you with turnover. You're not going to hire somebody that contingent or full-time that maybe fudge their resume a little bit. False candidates. I don't know about the people on this call, but what I'm hearing in the contingent space is an increasing number of candidates coming in that are not the candidates that did the interview. So having the assessment with the facial recognition and voice recognition to mitigate that, as well as a lower ramp up time because they now know, okay, I did the assessment for VectorVMS. This is what their backend looks like. And so I'm fully prepared coming in day one, knowing what systems they use. The next thing we'll talk about is scheduling. Do you know who you have working shifts across your full workforce? Many organizations have a scheduling solution in place today for their full-time workers, but the contingent is a little more manual, and there's kind of this lacking of integration across the organizations to be like, who do I have on the floor at any given time, regardless of their employment type? So again, going to that total talent management, thinking of the personnel regardless of their type of employment. And it also helps you to see who's on what shifts you have open. Do I need to throw a contingent worker in this full-time shift because it didn't get covered in time? Using it to make sure that all of your workers are not going too far into overtime, taking two shifts that are too close together, or picking up shifts outside of what they're qualified for. And the last one I want to talk about in the management component of total talent management is the org charting and analytics. So to me, this is a pivotal component of your workforces working together, and this can be done a couple of different ways. So the two main ones I want to talk about is the use of your HRIS system for reporting on all workers, so putting all the data in there and reporting from your HRIS. Others we've seen, and my personal favorite is org charting. So having an org chart, and I'm not just talking just names and numbers, it's having a sophisticated org charting system that allows you to incorporate your ATS, VMS, if you're using a freelance system, your HRIS, all that data into one place as a data aggregator to pull statistics around things like cost per hire, what openings do I have across my entire workforce in one visual, as well as filling full-time positions with contingent and vice versa. So here you need to start thinking about what are your key performance metrics that you want to analyze and help you determine if this program is successful. So that's really going to be specific to your organization, but we did create a few that we know you definitely should be tracking. The first is who is in your program, regardless of their employment status. Who are they? Where do they sit? The second is spend across your organization. How much are you spending on capital, regardless of their employment type? I feel like everybody can kind of give a basic number. For those of you that do have a total talent management process in place based off of the poll, I'm sure you can give me the exact number. And that's the benefit of doing a total talent management strategy, is knowing exactly what your spend is across your organization. And then how quickly are you filling each type of position specifically? So looking at, I have this UI UX role, for example, I need to fill this as quick as possible. And then looking at, okay, I filled it when I was contingent, twice as fast as I did with full-time. That might indicate to you that this role I need to put through my vendor management system, was maybe an RN, you're picking that up faster than your full-time tracking system. So kind of determining which jobs, looking at the time to fill, and determining which space is better for that position. So the job skill and quality across full-time contingent, quite simply, who is doing a better job? And this is where that kind of performance information comes into place. It will help you determine which avenue you want to send a candidate down when you're looking at how well it's being done and the quality of the work. So candidate attraction and retention, what is working for you on both sides of the house? Do you have higher turnover on your contingent side, or do you have higher turnover on your full-time side? You can use this to dig down even further. So maybe it's looking at the manager of, is this manager kind of difficult to work with? And because I see a lot of resignation on candidate and full-time, it could be things like, are your contingent workers or your full-time workers just not having that skill in that specific position, and that's why the turnover is so high, as well as, again, just what is better suited for that position to reduce turnover. The next is talent mobility, and this goes both ways. Maybe you're seeing a trend in the data that's telling you that this position is trending towards becoming more contingent. You're seeing more people want to become flexible and move into the contingent roles you have available within your organization. Or more commonly, we see how often are workers coming in on a contract basis and then converting to a full-time role. And you can use this information to analyze, okay, this staffing supplier continually brings me workers that I like enough to convert to my full-time work. Maybe I want to put them in the top tier. So if you're tiering your vendors, they're going to be in that top tier and receive access to that requisition first because they're bringing you that top talent. So using this as a way to do your vendor optimization, and then make adjustments to your sourcing strategy. So looking at, this position was full-time, now people more wanted to use it more in a contingent role, or maybe this contingent role continually converts, so maybe I need to look at a full-time position. And then looking internal before posting a job, so looking at that performance and seeing, okay, I have 10 contingent workers with a 5-star rating, maybe I send it to that group before I put this full-time position out there, as long as it's past the time that you can with your staffing supplier to convert that worker. So other notable mentions, measuring cost effectiveness of the position. Is it more cost effective to run this position in-house or in my contingent staff, as well as compliance? So something we've seen our users adopt is the need to look at compliance across the organization. So pulling reports for the worker, again, regardless of the employment type, to see, is this position better suited for both types? And then where is my compliance expiring for the month? Having that full list right in front of you for you to know where to touch to be like, I need this forklift license updated, your driver's license expiring, your nursing license is expiring, having all that information tracking in one place. So that kind of takes us through all 4 of the steps. To summarize, we're going to start by identifying and involving those key stakeholders, outlining your current state, using that current state to create a phased approach to implementing our future state that we continually adjust and change, and then bringing it all together and measuring and adjusting using the analytics that are provided and those different management technologies. So with that, we're going to ask our last polling question. So coming from an organization that has a vendor management system, applicant tracking system, would you like us to reach out for more information here? And we'll kind of just take that as an internal note and jump over as you guys are filling that out to see what type of questions you guys have after that presentation.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Taylor. Do have a couple of questions. All right. So the first one, a bit more into the, contingent workforce, of course, which is the focus. What kind of roles are you seeing organizations most interested in making contingent and transitioning from full-time to contingent?
Yeah, so when looking at contingent roles, a lot of the organizations that we look for or that we kind of manage contingent labor for, it's a lot of IT positions. So we're seeing a lot of IT, especially if you have a project that you don't want to bring in a full-time worker for. It's a set contract, set amount of time. I need a contingent worker for this long for an IT project. We see a lot of IT. We also see high turnover roles, like call centers, any type of light industrial. We're seeing a lot of contingent work there, as well as in the healthcare system. So especially with the pandemic, that fueled it. We've always had a large healthcare population in our systems, but it's been even heightened with the pandemic of different nursing, hospital, especially if it's decentralized, having a single place to manage contractors within a single source of record.
Got it. Thank you so much. And a little bit more about what you're seeing with the contingent workforce. I thought it was really interesting that you mentioned making learning and development opportunities available for them, perhaps similarly to what organizations are offering their full-time employees. What kind of learning and development opportunities are you hearing contingent workers ask for?
Yeah, that's a great question. So with the contingent space, it's different than the full-time because you're not really worried about progression as much as it is skill based. So something we're seeing more on the contingent side of the house is hiring more for the skill rather than the job. So it's identifying what the skill that worker has and allowing them to build on the skills and the skills kind of related to that position. So that way they're staying on top of what essentially their competitors or other contingent workers are learning as they're going. So it's really skill based and identifying with them what kind of skills they want to learn, what's going to make them better at their job. So making that investment of, we see you as a valuable member of our workforce, to build that learning strategy for them that's less like succession based and more like skill based.
Got it. Makes sense. Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, next question. You mentioned cost effectiveness, obviously, is a reason why organizations are motivated to leverage the contingent workforce more. What metrics are organizations using to really assess cost effectiveness there?
Yeah, there's a couple of different ways you can look at cost effectiveness. So if you're like truly comparing full-time to contingent, it's kind of looking at and taking sample sizes of a project versus a project. So how long did it take your full-time worker to do that job? Kind of looking, was it 2 weeks, 4 weeks, and then depending, kind of doing the math to understand what their salary was there. Versus contingent, it's a little bit easier because it's typically hourly. So you look how many hours it took them to complete that project to determine the cost effectiveness of, should I do this full time or should I do this as a contract worker? And then another tip I can give you there is if you are using a talent pool, it tends to be cheaper because when you're looking at the contingent hourly rate, there's so much built into that. You have kind of the vendor upcharge, which is going to include the benefits, the sourcing fee, any of the taxes. But if you're using your talent pool, you can typically bring that worker back at a payroll rate. So you're removing that like 20% markup of the sourcing finding fee, which is going to drive your costs down as well. And it really just determines, like I mentioned, it really just depends on the type of work you're doing. If it takes somebody strategic that's going to need to really get into the weeds of your organization, I would keep that on the full-time side of the house. But if you're looking at specific sets of projects that I only need it for this, I need this worker for this amount of time, that's going to help you with your costs as well. So hopefully that answered that question. If not, feel free to add more questions in the chat.
Oh, Taylor, I think you answered that perfectly. Thank you. And we'll keep an eye to see some additional questions coming in the chat, but I do have a couple more for you. You mentioned as you were answering that question about the talent pools, and I recall you mentioned that you suggest that someone should be assigned to curate the talent pools. Who are you seeing is usually taking that role in organizations right now? Is it the recruiters?
Yeah, so that's a great question. As I mentioned, curation is so important, and it depends on who's managing your program for you. So on our side of the house, when we're looking at talent pools, it's typically managed by either the in-house representative that's responsible for that program or someone on their team. Or we do a lot of work with managed service providers, and they are typically the ones curating that team. As direct sourcing and talent pooling grows, there's also organizations that have kind of created this niche in the space. And I've actually heard the term yesterday, a managed direct sourcing provider that does that specifically, where they come in and do that curation for you for like a percentage of the spend on that worker. So it's really up to how you want to structure it. But I would say it's either a designated resource within your organization that works closely with the hiring managers, your managed service provider if you're outsourcing, or your RPO if you're outsourcing the management of that team, or these like niche players that are coming in to manage these types of programs specifically.
Got it. Thank you. Okay, another question. This is super interesting. Let me make sure I'm gathering this correctly. Okay. How is total talent management essentially different from strategic workforce planning? Do you hear that term in your work? Is that what organizations are saying they're seeking? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and I don't know if it's just that term isn't used as much on the contingent side of the house where I spend most of my time, but to me it sounds interchangeable as well. But maybe it's like the square and the rectangle thing, where strategic planning is the overall component, or the overall concept, and total talent management is a component of that.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And when we talk about strategic workforce planning, we talk a lot about environmental scanning. You mentioned the pandemic, which is obviously very relevant, and you mentioned that that was contributing to organizations becoming more interested in the contingent workforce. Can you talk a little bit more about why that is?
Yeah, to me, and I've done a little research on this as well, it's less extreme than it was in 08, but it's kind of like this just uncertainty that comes with the pandemic. Like we start to feel okay, and then things like the Delta variant come along, and it makes us a little uncertain again. So we've seen an increase in the amount of contingent work, maybe from whether conscious or unconscious. It's a lack of commitment or readiness to bring in that full-time work, because with contingent, they're not your employee, technically. They're on somebody else's payroll. So if you need to scale up and down, it's like subconsciously, I think, easier to do. So we've definitely seen a rise, because we track that kind of information, and the amount of spend going through our tool, and then the drop in the spend when it comes to like the drop with the pandemic hit, and then the rise as we start to return to normal, and then it goes down a little bit with the uncertainty around the Delta. So we're definitely seeing a trend of how people are spending on the contingent workforce to match kind of what the economy is doing and kind of the uncertainty around the pandemic.
Got it. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Now, about step 4, you talked a bit about some of the tools towards bringing it all together. Where can we find those kinds of tools?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm sure they're probably part of HCI's learning. There are a lot of different like industry events that have these like niche players. Like something we've seen, especially across like the last 2 years, I would say specifically, are all these small individual technologies that are popping up that integrate with your applicant tracking system or your vendor management system. So we have a full network on our website if those are different technologies that you're looking at. As well as looking at different publications from different industry analysts to kind of determine which technologies you want to use, where to find them, as well as we find a lot of success with things like Capterra or different technology sites.
Thank you so much, Taylor. All right, that is it for the questions. So I'll turn it back to you to close.
Awesome. Yeah. So thank you so much for attending today, guys. I'm Taylor Ramchandani. I'm the VP of Strategy at VectorVMS. So feel free to link with me on LinkedIn if you think of any other questions. Always happy to help. For any of our upcoming events, we'll you can visit our events page to see those or any type of recorded webinars about things like the contingent workforce, total talent management, direct sourcing. We do a lot of different webinars, so happy to have you look at those. And if you have any questions or comments, we monitor the info at VectorVMS.com all the time. So hopefully you guys got something out of this. You feel more comfortable expanding on if you already have a total talent management platform today, or you have that confidence now to start this journey with total talent management. But thank you again for being here today.
Taylor, thank you. Thank you so very much for this really interesting presentation. Just a reminder to HCI members, today's webcast has been approved for HRCI and SHRM credit, as well as for HCI recertification. Your credits for attending this webcast will soon show up in your My HCI profile under the transcript tab. While you're there, don't forget to check out hci.org for even more insights, as well as information on our certifications and events. I'd like to say one more thank you to our presenter today, Taylor, and to the good people at VectorVMS. And of course, I'd like to thank you, our webcast viewers. Thanks for spending an hour with us, and we'll see you next time.